Venue connectivity is the biggest change to hit the broadcast world, really in a generation. In this session, we're going to get some insight from industry leaders on how this connectivity impacts not only on broadcasters, but also on rights holders and sports brands in the way they communicate with their audiences, both on a local scale and globally. So let's welcome back to the stage from ADI TV, Geraint Williams. James Clement is joining us again from Sky Sports. The Broadcast Operations Manager of the Premier League, Nick Morgan, is joining us. And from IMG, the Director of Business Development, Ollie Scott. And to give us a venue perspective from Middlesbrough, the Chief Operating Officer, Mark Ellis. Now, this season, the Premier League and the Football League have undertaken initiatives to connect all 92 professional Football League stadia to live venue, ADI's broadcast fibre network. Now, we're going to explore the reasons for this and some of the ways that broadcasters, rights holders and football clubs are using that network to their advantage. I'm going to direct a few questions to the panel, and if there's anything at the end, we will open the floor if there are specifics that you would also like to ask yourselves. So let's start with what the importance of a connected network is. Why would you want that in a venue? And I'm going to ask Nick for you to kick off with that, please.
Yeah, I think for us, there's two parts to it, really. One, it's actually satisfying demand over, as everyone reads well about, the popularity of football, and particularly the Premier League, has grown and grown, particularly internationally over recent years. And that's manifests itself in many ways, but particularly the amount of overseas broadcasters now who want to come on site, be part of the action, so that they can localise the delivery of the Premier League for their own markets. So that can mean many things, but ultimately it's about getting their content out of our venues. So that really was, if like, the main driver for us to look, or why we looked at getting some dedicated connectivity to service overseas broadcasters. And the other part, on the flip side of that, is creating demand, because while we know that, if like, some of the most established broadcasters around the world, our big names, perhaps currently NBC in America, beIN Sports, they now are in the Middle East, who have always had an appetite for coming on site. We're now in a position to tell other people who perhaps previously haven't had the awareness that they can, or certainly we haven't been able to give them the options through a network that ADI can provide, allows them to actually think, for not a lot of money, they can come on site and they themselves be part of making it local, rather than just taking a standard sort of world feed that we produce.
Ollie, perhaps you can talk a bit about what it's like for the overseas broadcasters to get content. I mean, how did it work before?
Well, not as efficiently as it does now. I mean, Nick's alluded to most of the reasons as to why we did it, but typically we were stuck with satellite delivery mechanisms, and very quickly the OB compounds would get used up. There's always an issue with space there, and really for us, it's not just the individual broadcasters to enhance their coverage, but for us to bring back production elements that really helped us to create a better world feed for the Premier League licensees. So it's been fantastic, really. It's the opportunity that we now have that previously wasn't there, and is very cost effective.
I think James has already discussed how it's helped from a broadcasting perspective in terms of delivering content. But Mark, perhaps we could come to you. At Middlesbrough, as a club, why did you specifically want to and need to connect to live venue?
I think first and foremost, driving revenues for the club. And getting engagement with fans to do that. And engagement for me starts with timely and interesting communications. And basically live venue has given us that tool. Far easier than it would have been to invest ourselves. It's given us a future-proofing tool. We've not had to invest in the technology, and we've got the tools now to engage with our fans.
Well, Geraint, you're the ones who did invest in the technology. What led you to build the network in the first place?
It was really looking at, I mean, we started about 4 years ago, so we first of all looking at the market, and I think we're obviously very well known. I think we define ourselves as a hardware, services and content business, and I think our work with clubs, we were seeing a trend more and more. So I think the work that was done with the Premier League and with Sky in the UK, the expectation of the fan was much greater in terms of content. But actually the challenge for the actual venues themselves, and I remember sitting with one of the chief execs at one of the Premier League clubs once, and him saying to me, you know, the challenge we've got is we need a state-of-the-art production television centre, but we only actually want to use it 19 times a year. And that was the big problem. And we really then looked at it, and at the time we owned an outside broadcast company, which we were just taking the decision to sell. And we could see the opportunity within fibre by essentially trying to create a network that everybody could buy into. So I guess our real ideas at the beginning was about taking something that we could aggregate it. So in the very way that the sports rights are sold on a very aggregated way, this was about flipping it the other way around and saying, actually, there's an aggregated cost-saving model here, because if we can put fibre into all these venues and connect them to one place, then we have a number of key advantages. So one big one is the fact that ADI is not a rights holder, so we don't meddle in the rights market. We're not a television producer of content outside of Stadia, so we work very well with key stakeholders in the industry. And we saw the opportunity, therefore, to take a pipe, and I mean, in the very early brainstorming sessions we had here, we had essentially a pie chart, and we just started to divide the pie chart up, and we said, actually, if we can put a pipe into the venue, and we can get a chunk of that pipe to basically provide connectivity for Sky, and a chunk of that pipe to provide connectivity to the Premier League, and a chunk to provide connectivity for IMG for the work they do with the Premier League, and actually then we get all that content and send it back down to the venues. So we've connected, obviously we've connected over 100 venues now with the service, and we've got 11 clubs who currently use the service, including Middlesbrough, and create that match day content. So back to what I was saying at the beginning, getting that immersive experience at the venue is very hard to do. I mean, James talked about some of the challenges that a broadcaster such as Sky has, who's doing 1,000+ OBs a year, and actually the expectation, I think it goes right the way back down to this expectation of the fan. The fan comes to the venue and expects more and more and more. And I mean, you only have to sit at home and watch Sky with 26 cameras and replays and red button, and then you go actually to the game itself, and that game hasn't actually changed fundamentally that much from a technology and media experience point of view at the venue.
Yeah,
so
with everybody else now, every piece of news comes out of Twitter or somewhere else. It's the news agency world of breaking news coming through a traditional form. We need to have that content. If something will break and we literally can't hold for the material to catch up, we need the material then and there, and we need some way to get it in.
Okay, so that's the importance of why the network is needed. What about how we use it, and what a typical match day scenario might be? James, we're going to start with you for that. How has it affected production values?
So immediately, the beginning of this season, the request came from the editorial guys for Soccer Saturday to say they were going to go on air at 12 and go off air just before the Saturday Night Football show started, or before the game started. So I needed to be able to give them opportunities for content for that entire window. And that meant across the Premier League and the Football League, we would all the way up to 3 o'clock try and get fresh content. So we can't repeat stuff. It's got to all be new. And then from 3 o'clock, it's a bit more of a stable offering because of the fact that the matches are on. But before then, we needed to find content that was relevant, fresh, and that the viewer would actually take. So a part of the Premier League rules, there were the press conferences, pre-match manager interviews that we knew we were going to be getting, which we could actually get back, put those in. There are wide shots of simple things when we go in and out of breaks. They can show a wide shot of the ground filling up. That was content we wouldn't have before. They would just talk about something, but we can actually show relevant content. So they would show a shot of Craven Cottage, show fans running around, go to break. It's a very simple shot that's got a small value attached to it within Sky, but helps the editorial relevance throughout the afternoon stay strong. And that runs right the way through to mixed zones and post-match press conferences after the game. Before would be very hit and miss as to what we would get on those. If a story did break, we wouldn't necessarily have a crew there to be able to go to a press conference further on. If something happens, say there's a contentious decision, we've already had the manager's interview, we want to go back later, actually get something from the manager again in the press conference. we would be able to get that content now. And even though it's not a right thing, it still gives us an avenue to get it in. And if we've gone off air with Sports News, with Soccer Saturday, then we've got the website, we've got YouTube channels, we've got many other ways of getting that content out, so our viewers always know it's there. If we've got it, it'll be published.
So that's a domestic broadcast view. What about internationally, Ollie? How has it changed things for the international broadcasters?
Well, similarly to what James said, I mean, our broadcasters are no different. You know, they have the same requirements that Sky have. They want that same content, those same wide shots, interview lines. So by having the amount of circuits that we do, not only if they come on site to do studios or on-site production of varying degrees, we can also get all of that content and offer it to them live. So it really helps to maximise the gazillions of dollars that they've spent on the rights fees in the first place, really. So it's about allowing them that opportunity and not restricting them.
It helps them to personalise it, if you like,
Absolutely,
their output,
so,
and make it different from everyone else.
Exactly, and also to concentrate on players that are of particular interest to them.
Mark, from a venue perspective, how do you use it? Could you perhaps talk us through the process of how the content is compiled and how it's used at the Cellnet?
I think the three phases really that we look at. I mean, the easiest one is the in-match content, and to be frank, ADI take care of that. That one we use a lot with our sponsors. That's where the revenue comes from. The ball goes out of play, there's an advert. Getting the right balance though on the adverts and the content is quite key. The second area we use is, I'd say, the 40 minutes before the game, or up to 20 minutes before the game, I should say, where a lot of that is information that the club want to get across to the fans, or fans have actually asked us to do things, things going on around the Teesside area, for instance. We'll get pre-planned shots and they'll be worked on with ADI, all planned in advance. The last 20 minutes before the game and half time is a little bit more chaotic when things go on. And we're 1 year in and learning the way, but one of the things we've done is redirected our camera resources to actually live camera on the match day, so that they're shooting fans, something going on the pitch at half-time, penalties or tunnel shots. And that's creating a lot more interest, and it's something we're going to try and do a lot more of. And capturing that shots isn't just match day, it gives us a lot more content for 24/7 engagement, which is the other aspect to this.
Geraint, what happens on match day here?
There's a challenging question. I mean, I think
we've only got 35 minutes.
Yeah. I think, I mean, the thing for us is I suppose we've come from a number of different angles. I mean, coming from an OB company, we're used to being on site. So I guess in some ways we have a team of people and engineers who have had that experience, and still for other events that the business does have that experience and continue to know it. But so I think for our point of view, we come at it with the experience of knowing how difficult it is, as Ollie says, when you've got compounds on sites and you're all squashed in and you've got trucks in. So bringing it here is a bit like, I mean, it's almost like operating drones in a bunker, really, in a different way, because you make it far more focused. You're actually able to focus on the content and the technicals far easier. You're not dealing with the challenges of a car park full of fans and away fans and loads of guys drinking, and just in terms of even simple things here, such as people being able to kind of get food and think clearly and content. But it's having all that content in one place, which actually makes a real big difference. And that, I think, then translates to it being smoother and people being able to look at it. So internally, it's split between a very technical team who are literally doing all the lineups and working with both Sky and IMG to make sure that those lineups are there, and you've got those broadcasters around the world all taking the feeds, and the right feeds are there at the right time. And you know, that is a challenge when we're handling the number of feeds. I mean, it's interesting looking at our booking system this week prior to the event. We've got about 8,500 bookings booked and switches on the system. So that is essentially switching 8,500 pieces of content. And you know, as we say here, some of those will be NBC in the States, so they're talking huge audiences of global connectivity. So it's that technical side, and then really it's the content side that our content team internally, then going back to what Mark's saying about sending that content back to the venues, it's about creating that engagement, and it's then about capturing that engagement on for use afterwards. So internally, it's probably quite a nice split, really, and it's quite a calm. I mean, it's a very calm place to be on a match day.
It's the only place that's calm on a match day,
99% of the time. But it does make it. I think it also allows you as well. I think we all have the vagaries and challenges of being at venues and in OBs, and OBs will never really go away in that respect. So I think when you've come from that and you're used to that, and used to the rain and the wind and the challenges, I think when you're here, it does allow the production team to be very focused on the content and how they're going to create it and how it creates the engagement and what the club need. And I mean, it's also reacting to what goes on at the club on a day, because, okay, you've got 90 minutes of football in a football environment, but actually it's the build-up to it, and you don't know who's going to walk through the door. I mean, we had one club last year where literally the floor manager radioed in to say, I've got Sylvester Stallone here, we want to do an interview with him on the large screen. And I think everybody this end thought it was a joke, and then the camera turns and Sylvester Stallone is stood there ready to have an interview and wants to go on screen. So I think it's been able to do that here, I think, which helps immensely, really.
And Nick, if we can come to you from the Premier League perspective, what would be the typical usage for the Premier League, and how has the network grown since it was introduced?
Well, primarily our fundamental usage is all via Premier League production, I guess. So I guess for those who don't know, just to explain, we appoint IMG to run Premier League productions for us, which essentially makes our world feed and distributes everything that our 3 UK broadcasters generate all around the live match for us overseas, as well as running a channel or a content service as well on a 24/7 basis throughout the season. So really our needs in that way are satisfied primarily via IMG. I guess the other thing I didn't mention earlier, really, in terms of obviously the satisfying demand, generating demand, is also the adding value part of it. As Ollie so eloquently put, our broadcasters do spend quite a lot of money, and for us to give something back, or at least try to maximise for them the benefit they get. So really, for us, it's about actually delivering. We're a facilitator, really, for our overseas broadcasters, and to try and actually give them as much of a host broadcast experience as we possibly can. So they're not yet anywhere near being able to choose their own cameras quite. But the more we can do that, adding the wide shot so they can permanently have that in the back of their TV monitors, giving them the opportunity to make presentations at any time during the match day environment. Where it goes from here, in terms of what else we're looking at it for, referees currently get the match recordings that we all see. At the moment, they have to wait until the next week to get it. And we're looking at ways of trying to improve that speed to them so that they can actually react to some of the big decisions that have been made, and equally get a chance to see some different angles that they might not have otherwise seen. Some of the stuff that perhaps doesn't go to air but is useful. If you and I perhaps might not think of it as being particularly interesting for broadcast, but from a referee coaching and development point of view, it can be. Equally, for us, a way of looking at giving, going back to what I was saying about the host broadcast experience for our broadcasters, is trying to get more ISO angles of footage of the incidents to them more quickly. At the moment, again, or up until now, we've only ever had on the match day what you've seen at home. Now, often, obviously, for half-time analysis, for full-time analysis, for review shows, these broadcasters around the world want more than that. So actually, for us, as the middleman, we're just trying to be the broker of that in some way. We know that there's a lot of cameras on site that we help Sky to put in terms of making and asking clubs to build these facilities. Sky and BT and BBC then go and film it, and there's a bit of a bottleneck really up until now in terms of getting this out more widely to our broadcasters. So for us, really, we're not particularly a beneficiary in the middle too much. We are, but doing what we can to facilitate this between host broadcaster, between venue, and then between our broadcasters overseas.
Okay, so let's look now then at the benefits of having a fibre-connected stadium. Mark, I'm going to start with you again as our venue man on the panel. What are the commercial benefits of using remote production, and how does that impact on fan engagement?
First and foremost, obviously sponsorship. With the big screen and the concourse TV setup, you've got opportunities there to get revenue. But as I said earlier, getting the balance right on that is quite key. I've been to a few stadia where it's all adverts and nobody looks at it. The thing we've done, and we are still learning, it's the first year, we've moved our internal and third-party resources onto capturing other events around the stadium, so that we've got that content to show as well. And that's where a lot of the fans are getting something out of it and coming back. Many things, for instance, in our family zone on a match day, we tend to focus on that's going on, and simple things, just showing some of the kids enjoying themselves actually just brings them back, week after week, and that's what we want. We want to get more people through the gates. So it's actually moving our internal resource into other areas and letting ADI take care of the bits that they're good at, and then using that tool to the best of our ability. And I think we've just got to keep growing year on year. We've learned a lot this year, but some good thoughts for next year.
Okay, Ollie, if I can come to you, if you could explain to us how the network, I guess it's the layered services that you get through the network, isn't it, that add the value for the broadcast rights holders?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's interesting, really, because when we initially sat down and looked at this round about this time last year, and we put a network in and we worked out all the kind of cost implications and how we could share with other entities that were involved. But I mean, very quickly, 8 circuits that we have available out of each ground, and we're already, it's not enough. So it's incredible, really. I mean, and it sits across all sorts of different areas of our business. It's the live stuff, the Premier League news, the channel. Various different entities are all finding value in that, and it's a great place to centralise all of our kind of technical operations as well. James's presentation was very good, really, and it's no different from our end. But having all of that in one place makes a real difference.
And Nick, has your feedback from the clubs been that this does really help them out, having this service available to them?
I think, that's a tricky one, because obviously we're from our point of view, the use of live venue for us is delivery more for broadcasters. So in terms of, obviously there are benefits for the clubs, if you like, use, as Geraint said earlier, in terms of bringing content back in clearly, and how they
would your clubs not be doing the same sort of thing that Mark's doing there at Middlesbrough? Yes,
exactly. But we that's not so much something that we would necessarily get involved in the middle. I think that's almost a club benefit of the system. Sure. For us, probably the club benefit is more on the perhaps the operational headache that it takes away in some ways, in terms of having to bring in lots of cables, trucks, whenever. It's there. That we run a new, or IMG run a news show for us on that channel every day of the week. So, given it's a Premier League news channel, obviously we're always talking about our 20 clubs. So actually being able to come whatever day of the week to do it without having to necessarily knock on the club door, work out where we can park, etc., it does help the relationship between sort of ourselves, Premier League Productions, and the clubs. So how the clubs get their content benefits, that's probably a slightly different and outside of our central remit. But certainly, I think the way that we can just turn up now and do our job without really getting, treading on too many toes, I think is certainly a big benefit.
Geraint, if perhaps you could just sum up then from your experience, because you are getting feedback from the clubs, I imagine, all the time, what the appeal is of the network for users.
Yeah, it's been huge, and I think our biggest challenge, as Ollie says there, is managing the club's expectations of it as much as the broadcasters. So Ollie's saying there we're quite quickly 8 feeds from most of the grounds, and you think about in conventional satellite terms, that could have been 8 trucks. So we've taken down that space, and then the actual expectation of the clubs has grown massively. So we've now got 11 clubs using remote production from here on a match day. So rather than them having to install complicated and very expensive television studios, back to that, only using them 19-20 times a year, we're now producing the content from here, and I think that's been massive. We're just about to start construction on another building on the site here with another 23 galleries. So that probably gives you a good understanding of the expectation that clubs have got, and the take-ups for us has been quite considerable. We thought it would take quite a bit more time for people to catch on to it. But actually people have taken it really quickly and see the value of it. And I think it's also, I spend a lot of my life sat with clubs, sat with FDs and chief execs and commercial teams, and if you're sat there saying, well, we can build you a television studio, it's going to cost you £250,000, it's not a very compelling proposition to most clubs. If you're sat there saying, well, actually there is zero capex, but what we can then do is charge you on a match-by-match basis for a facility here, which is an aggregated facility, that makes a huge difference. And I think some of the stuff we'll be talking about later today and tomorrow is again trying to really get that layered service to work well, where some of our partners will be talking about some of the technologies that we've managed to aggregate here that we can then deliver across the network, that again means the clubs are not going to have to buy the actual solutions themselves. And I mean, just editing content is a prime example, with the amount of storage and content and the amount of space it takes up and the bandwidth, that on an individual basis, if you're going to go and do that through all the league football clubs around the country and build almost 92 facilities to edit football, and then you get into the other sports such as cricket and rugby and horse racing, it becomes an immense undertaking and very costly. Going back to my comment before about aggregation of rights, and the mirroring that is the aggregation of cost savings. If you can ultimately achieve that by bringing all of those into one place and actually ingesting and holding content and everybody using the same content, then that makes a huge difference. And I know Adobe have got some really interesting stuff this afternoon that they're going to talk about and how that's changed it. So I think it's probably, at the moment, it's very much a sort of first just going into second phase of what the true benefits to the club become. And I think, you know, in a year's time, I think the club benefit will be massive in terms of what it really brings them and how it really reduces their costs. But then I think it's back to what I said in the opening. It's about then understanding, being able to manipulate that content and multi-purpose that content to send it back in all the different formats, so that you can then have the true benefit of being able to have ultimately the fans sat in the seat consuming the content, which there's a couple of clubs in the country have done it, but actually it's the preserve of the very, very rich clubs currently to be able to give that fans the immersive type of experience that you'd probably get if you're sat at home watching Sky, really.
Just another couple of general ones from me before we open it up to the floor. While I've got you here captive, I'm going to ask you all, if there was one piece of advice that you could give, what would that advice be? Mark, I'm going to start with you again. From a club or venue perspective, what advice would you give if someone was looking to install the network?
I think get the roles and accountabilities clear from the start, because introducing live venue changes what you do, and it impacts quite a lot of people, and you've got to be really clear what you then expect of them afterwards. And we went through a bit of a storming phase, shall I say, in the first few months after we went live with it.
I mean, that's the benefit, of course, of an event like this, isn't it? That you can share those sort of experiences, and other people can benefit from them. Ollie, what advice would you give to rights holders?
Well, I hope I'm on commission from Geraint here. But, I mean, certainly our experience has been one of build it and they will come. You know, we sat down and looked at this, and for a while couldn't imagine where we were going to get the usage. And 6 months into the season, and we're already looking at doubling our capacity. So, you know, that has genuinely been our experience of the product.
Nick, I'm going to look at you from a governing body perspective. What advice or challenges would the governing bodies face if they're looking, perhaps other sports, looking to bring this sort of network in?
I think, well, I guess advice is to start early. You know, as Ollie said, it was probably about 12 months ago, which is pretty late. You know, as the way we operate on 3-year cycles, like a lot of federations, in terms of, and almost the money you spend is based obviously on what the money you get in. And so while we were sort of having these ideas before that, obviously until we really got a good idea of who our broadcasters were and what they were wanting in terms of the new 3 years, it was difficult to pull the trigger and go on this. However, so, you know, to have got, you know, our 20, obviously the Football League as well, but from a selfish point of view, our 20 installed and up as quickly as they did in a pretty short time frame, I think is you know, fair credit to ADI. So my advice would be don't leave it perhaps as late as we did.
I was 22 when we started, actually, about a year ago.
James, I'm not sure I'm going to ask you to give advice to other broadcasters. I don't think that's really in our interest. But is there any advice that you would give to venues from a broadcast perspective?
I think the biggest benefit that we had at Sky was that the conversations around the Premier League and the Football League involved all the parties who were ever going to attend that venue. When you're doing something like this, I completely agree with Ollie. If you build it, they will come and everyone will start to use it, because the market's been crying out for someone to open the door and offer something else. But because of the kind of gearing of it to be a venue and rights-owned solution that's offered to everyone who goes there, because there aren't very many sports where there's one dominant party using everything on site. You need to bring those people together and understanding their needs. So the Kamara Cam, the Envision, is a very specific thing that Sky use. No one else is going to want to use that, but if you're putting this product in, you might as well speak to us, add that little bit in, because it will be a huge benefit to us. If that wasn't there, if the Football League setup had happened and it was just the match feed coming out and we hadn't done the InVision on that as well, we still would have been sending a satellite truck, which would have undermined the cost model of everything we did. But those conversations, which normally happen out of my league, out of most people's leagues, that chairman and someone like Barney, the MD in my company, if those conversations don't open up a little bit and let that conversation happen, you could get the wrong solution. And it's because it's such a fine monetary decision as to whether or not you install or not. I think it's important that everyone on board has a say, and yeah, that'd be my advice. Talk to each other.
Geraint, any advice?
Yeah, I think ultimately we were very lucky in the very early days because we got very good engagement from Ollie and Nick and James and their respective companies. So I think it was good from our point of view. Everybody came to us and spent a lot of time, and I think there was a lot of time invested. And I think again from a club point of view, Mark and his team again have, and quite a lot of clubs have invested a lot of time. But I think as one of the media magazines in the industry said recently, you know, the best investment anybody will ever make in technology in a stadium starts with a train ticket to Preston, and it's it's one of our biggest things. And I often sit with all the commercial team internally, and I think we probably do more thinking about how to get people to Preston than the tourist information people locally. So I think it's hard to get people to understand and see what it is. I think, you know, I've often described live venues a bit like electricity. It's great, but actually unless you do something with it, it's actually not going to do anything. I think it's getting people to come and understand. And I think, you know, that our whole thinking around the Sports VMT was really to offer people that opportunity to come and get the right kind of takers together and get some engagement around it, and ultimately have a look at what we do. I think we've tried to very much make sure that we have nothing competitive to rights holders or to content manufacturers or sort of content producers, and we very much try to make sure that then we are a very open house, and hopefully you'll get a chance to see that over the next few days. And, you know, by all means, walk around and you know, grab any of my colleagues to have a look around at the facilities we've got here, because ultimately we can tailor things very specifically. We're extending the venue now into a number of other sports outside of football, and the application is entirely different, but actually there's the same common technical things. And actually it's not about technology, it is about content. I mean, we're all sat here, we all have a role and an involvement in technology, but actually it's just about content, is what people see. So I'd say to the venues, yeah, come and see us and have a look at us, and, you know, we're very open to working with them in the ways they need to, really, because everybody does it differently.
Okay, I'm now going to throw things open to the floor. Is there anyone who would like to ask any of the panel a question? We have some roving mics. One down here.
Hello, Marcel Ridjard, AFL Architects. As we work on stadiums and venues, it's very interesting for us to know at the beginning what we need to do to engage with all this as well. Do you think it should be stadium and management led, as Mark's finding now, or should it be the industry and the media leading it? Who's leading this? Because it seems to be very open, which is exciting, but it's not clear.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. My background prior to starting ADI in '91 was actually construction and architecture, so I come at it probably from the building constructional point of view, but I think then I look at it and understand it very much from a getting people together, and I think you probably hit the nail on the head there. I think it's about getting together. I mean, we as a team have spent an inordinate amount of time together in terms of, Ollie and I have smiled a number of times. We have 2 hours in the diary for a meeting, and it ends up being 4 or 5 or 6 hours, and trying to pull it together. And I think it's about open engagement. It's about looking at what do these people want, and how can you get everybody together in that way. And I think we've tried really hard over the, not just recently, but over the 20 odd years of ADI, we've tried very hard to make sure that we are not having a conflicting business operation. We're not sat here and in the same time we've got someone within business trying to sell rights or step on toes. And I think as long as you can get a really open forum and everybody trusts each other, and you can all say, well, actually, I need this from this, and I need this and this, and this is what we need, then you can make it work really well. And I think James makes a point really validly there about a lot of the infrastructure that we've put into the Football League clubs, and how we work very closely with the technical team from Sky to make sure that there was all that connectivity. And Nick, the lawyer from the Football League, is here as well, and Nick knows the amount of conversations we had around trying to make sure there's these facilities in, so that actually it's not just that someone rocks up and actually they can get cables down. I mean, just, you know, the maths alone, we put over 30,000 kilometres of fibre into venues. So that's not connecting them from the road to the venue, of which we put tens of thousands of fibre for that. But actually, we put 30,000 plus kilometres of fibre inside the venues. So that was, you know, that was turning up at Man United at one side of the ground and getting fibres right from one side of the ground through all the stadium to the other parts to get that connectivity. So I think it, again, you know, open forums, I think, and the more dialogue that goes with it, because you get so many different people after different things. I think it, you know, it's trying to get that platform for it. And you know, again, back to today, a whole idea really with today was to try and provide that platform to bring industry thinkers together a little more and to be able to actually take that content and you know, really kind of debate it a little bit at the right levels.
Anyone else want to add? Yes, Mark?
I think it's an excellent question, actually. Really, the infrastructure requirements on the clubs now are just going up exponentially. I was saying to Nick on the way in the car, the Premier League requirements for media are just phenomenal. And Middlesbrough's got a stadium that was built in '95, and it just cannot meet these requirements. It just cannot do it. So the investment we would have to make to be able to comply with the direction we're moving in here is certainly beyond our means in the short term. And I think there's got to be some sort of review there very quickly, because the gap between Premier League and Championship is widening.
Does that answer your question? Somewhat.
Yes.
Would you like some more?
I think I can add a bit from a Sky point of view, because obviously we've been key in the Premier League over the years, and there is a shift now for the decision making around infrastructure to be it was previously always a Sky installed system, and now it's a much more Premier League led worldwide system, because so that people can access them. So to directly answer your question, I think it's right, in my view, it's rights owners working with the venue that's going to have a particular sport in. Now, if you're Hull or somewhere like that, maybe there's a little bit of a clash there between what football and what rugby league may need, or but I think the discussion should be led there, because in a 3-year rights process, you could find that the broadcaster that had all the main influence is gone, and there's another one in there. So you want the rights owners to be leading that, and then there's a working group for the Premier League that brings on all the different elements of the broadcasters to discuss their needs. And then, in my view, that rights owner should then speak to all the clubs that are part of that league or cup or whatever it is to actually implement them and make them reasonable. Because largely it'll be the rights owner that's giving the money to the club to start with and asking them to spend that money.
So is that Sky?
No, the rights owners,
Right.
not the rights holders.
No, that would be us.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, and just to expand on that, that's James is right. It is something that we've centrally taken control of. Not just you know, for the example that James says of, you know, that actually the rights might bounce between different broadcasters, but it's actually so that we can offer a standard of service across all 20 clubs, rather than just having perhaps amazing facilities at the Emirates or a new stadium that you might think of compared to some of the older stadiums. Actually, you know, people don't really care. They just want to have a good experience wherever you are. And I think for as much as we centrally will drive this sort of innovation and investment for our own, I say selfish requirements, but our own requirements in terms of adding value to our broadcast partners, it isn't just us. Clearly, the clubs themselves, there are benefits for the clubs. It all comes down to fan engagement one way or the other, whether it's a fan engaged sitting somewhere around the world watching it on TV, or a fan in the stadium. I know we're going to come on to that in later sessions about that engagement within the stadium. That's what it's all about. Whether it, you know, so, and obviously from our role in the centre of trying to maximise value for the clubs that are part of the league, our primary focus really is on that broadcast piece of it. But actually, clearly, there is a much wider part of it. Although I think our goal will always be, you know, on that sort of large chunk of the revenue, which is always going to dominate our business model. There are parts of our business that are very clearly looking at the in-stadium experience and how we improve that. So I think it's not just the federation in the middle. I think the club will always have their own goals in terms of maximising value, maximising their own fan engagement. So I don't think there's a simple answer of, oh, it's just us or just them. It is a combination.
Now, there's a gentleman up there.
Thanks very much. Duncan Burbage from Stream UK. It's It's clear you've got, with technology, an increased ability to gather content, and you can publish much more quickly. But it's something that James touched on and also Mark touched on with the Camara cam. You've got a risk that the quality is going to deteriorate to an extent that it's brand damaging, and the workflows that are necessary for respecting the integrity of this content are shaken up by this new technology. I'm just wondering how the conversations are looking at the moment and who is currently having those conversations with regard to maintaining the quality of the content being produced as publishing it and gathering it gets easier.
So I'll jump in there first. As I say about getting everybody in a room early on, even though it may be seen as undermining a rights negotiation, if those conversations aren't had with the right people to set that standard high from the very beginning, then quickly you can find yourself in a position where you're handed a new set of rights. So from an operational point of view, in Sky could be handed a new set of rights that's got laid out the delivery methods within it already, and that can already be lower than Sky would expect. And then we'll take the conversations further in with our technology teams and our content delivery teams, and then immediately this isn't acceptable to Sky, so then we have to push back out, and it goes back through lawyers and it can be drawn out. So we try and get in as early as we can. We have guidelines set out for what is acceptable delivery for Sky. How much of our content is SD, for example, that kind of thing. And the word HD is a big problem within the industry, because it's assumed that if something's just referred to as being HD, then that's fine. But there are all kinds of grades of HD. There's iPhone captured material that if it's got the 1080, then everyone says that's HD. Or there's right the way up to the full broadcast. And if we don't get the bit rates understood within those, and that was a key part of our discussions with ADI, was getting the bit rates as high as we could, because we don't want a sustained dropping down. But whereas people say, oh, we could just do it like this, we have to carefully control it. And it is a battle, because our editorial teams don't necessarily sometimes see that. They just want it. They just want the content. Why can't I have it cheaper? And we literally have to pay to keep the quality up high.
Anyone else like to add to that?
I mean, I would say we look at it in a way that the quality is never really questioned. So the actual quality of the feed, the HD, it's all 100 megabit JPEG 2000, which is actually a better service than we get from the more traditional means. But really, for me, where you might compromise what could be seen as quality is in the redundancy that you employ. So, James was alluding in his earlier presentation that if they've got an F1 Grand Prix in that's going out live, then they would want that on fibre by completely diverse routes. Whereas we might take a look at this content that we're doing. This is all value-add content. It's not the live match that we're delivering over this. We might use a leg of it to be the backup for something else, but a fan cam, a wide shot, something like that, you don't want to lose it, obviously, but it's not absolute Armageddon if you do. So rather than employing a fully redundant system, the emphasis is more on resilience as opposed to redundancy, and that way, you're not really questioning the quality of it, but you're finding a more cost-effective means of getting the content that you need without having to spend more money than you have available.
And we're also, just to add in, we're also monitoring the transmission path a lot more because of the number of encodes, re-encodes, especially with the transatlantic stuff we do. Get something in from America, it could have gone through 3 or 4 hops, been encoded every time. And with the web stuff, by the time you've gone down to the web, or by the time it's got through the Skybox to someone at home, you can really notice that again. And even though everyone along the route says that they're HD, all those encodes need to be monitored. So it's just a matter of engaging with everyone involved in the path.
I think going back to our position in the centre, I think we're very fortunate both, I guess, in the UK, in that we have 3 established, or even BT, who are new to broadcast, but have broadly established production teams, and obviously as a technology company have been around a long time. Sky and BBC we all know very well anyway, and so actually their competitive tension and hunger to be as good as they possibly can for their consumers actually leaves us in quite a nice position in the middle, because they're not going to sacrifice quality to the point that the pictures that we get at home are going to be such that you're going to start thinking, actually, this is no good, I'm no longer going to pay for it. So And actually, we are at the forefront in the UK ahead of our the overseas territories by and large. So actually, what these guys produce for us actually helps us sort of set a benchmark around the world, rather than us trying to look around thinking, hang on, how are we catching up? So we're a very fortunate third-party beneficiary of that.
Anyone else? We've got time for one more. Yes, gentleman just here.
Hi, sorry, Matt Trumbull from Rugby League. Just a quick follow-on to that on the qualities. Question for James and Geraint. What to Sky, as being at the front of broadcast technology, do they have plans for 4K? And Geraint, can the system handle that?
Yes and yes.
So
it could go on a while.
Yeah. So my
You've
boss,
got 3 minutes.
I think my boss is over in Paris tomorrow. I think on the SVG discussing Ultra HD, as Sky's adopted wording is. Whether it's 4 or 8 or what number will be attached to it. From an operational point of view, right now and in the short term, we're just trying to make sure that there's as many potentially expansive data routes out of venues so we can accommodate whatever comes along. There is too many questions around the 4K and getting it to the actual consumer for me to be able to directly say this is what we're going to do.
Could you just explain for some of us who aren't quite so techie what 4K is?
So
sounds like Special K, only with
Yeah.
4 things.
So again, with us, what happened with HD, there is you can go down to certain retailers and buy what's known as a 4K TV now. The availability of content to be able to watch on that is hugely limited, and again, as with HD, how you actually view that, how it's encoded to be able to get it to your home, because at the moment it's only a VOD, it's a video on demand system. There isn't any way of broadcasting it into people's homes, and probably won't be for another year or so yet. And until that comes, everyone's just being led by the television sales. So we, in order to get to a 4K system, would need to replace pretty much our entire infrastructure and the end box. There are ways of doing it that mean you just download through a VOD, and it'll probably go to be films first, and that could be 4K, 8K, depending on what your TV is. It's just it's from SD, well, from analog to SD to HD, 4K, 8K. Dream on the number. And the weekend, the Japanese were saying they were going 8K, and they were skipping 4K again. So
That's Special K, just more fattening.
yeah.
Geraint, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, again, as Claire said before, for those who perhaps are less techie, the 4K is just essentially 4 times as many pixels of resolution. But I think what's also important is the compression. So I think in all of it, whilst you can focus on resolution, compression is also hugely important. So at the moment, if you look at historically, what a consumer sees at home on a DVD is about 5 megabits of compression. What we compress between us is around 120 megabits. So literally it's 120 divided by 5, and that's how much less compression we're putting on it than anybody else's. So from our point of view, pictures that we're providing over the network are less compressed by, what will it be, 24 times. So there's 24 times less compression, which means the picture's good. And back to really what James said is that actually, if you keep on encoding and decoding, compressing and uncompressing things, they don't actually look good. It doesn't matter whether it's 4K, 8K, 2K. Actually, you're just going to make the quality of it worse. And I think, this afternoon, I think that particularly Adobe's piece around keeping content in one place and everybody accessing the same piece of content ingested once, as opposed to everybody trying to move content around everywhere to get it locally to then edit it, is probably the really key kind of question that most venues or that most venues have to answer to really get the most out of the content, really. And you know yourself the challenges you face within rugby, same challenge that football faces and most sports face, as to how to get that content and have it and then manipulate it and keep that quality high.
Right, I'm going to bring that debate to a close now. It's been a long session, and there's been lots and lots to absorb in that. If I could just ask you to thank our panel, Geraint, James, Nick, Ollie and Mark.